I want you guys to turn to the people next to you. Tell them one of your New Year's resolutions. Go ahead. Just take a second. Doesn't have to be long. Go for it. Good job, everybody. Statistically speaking, you're not going to do that. I hate to be Debbie Downer, but I'm sorry, guys. In my former life, I used to work at St. Louis Christian College as the IT guru, doing all kinds of computer sorts of stuff. And I met a guy named Doug Lay. And if you've been around here for a little while, you probably know him. He serves as a stand-in preacher when Doug's out of town occasionally. He served as an interim preacher while they were looking for a new senior guy. So he's kind of got some ties here. And I love Doug Lay. He has become like a father figure, a mentor figure to me, even still. In fact, he's the first person to suggest to me that I might have ADHD. And if you guys have known me for like 5 minutes, you are like, you didn't think about that earlier? And I know, I'm with you. By the way, side note, I didn't take my medicine today, so hang in there. So, I love Doug Lay. In fact, I don't think I would be here if it weren't for Doug Lay. And so, one Father's Day, I decided I want to get him a present. And so I was racking my brain. And he kept talking about how he missed the good old days of the double-edged safety razor that his dad taught him how to shave with. And he said, I can't find them anymore. This is just terrible. I hate these cartridge razors, blah, 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 blah. Like you do sometimes. And so I was so excited when I saw in the store that they had now Van der Hagen or some weird German name. They had safety razors. So I bought one up and I gave it to him as a Father's Day present. And I said, I love you, Father Doug. And then while I was there, I decided, maybe I'll give this a try. I'll give it a shot. Shave like my grandpa used to. It'll be awesome. And I was hooked. I loved it. So I eventually bought another razor and started using it as my daily driver, so to speak. And I was getting so excited. This was like a new passion, a newfound hobby that I loved. And I was getting so excited. I know you guys are like, dork. That's okay. I even started collecting some. This is a Gillette Tech razor that was made in the 50s. Bought this at an antique store. That's a win right there. It came with the original blades that I chose not to use just in case. I don't know if they were used before. This one I love. It's a Gem Micromatic. It's a single edge razor that takes like the kind of blade you might see in like a utility knife or something like this. This was made in the 1930s. In fact, this is what I shaved with this morning. And I know some of you guys are like out there saying, yeah, I can tell you used a razor that's 100 years old. I can't fault you. I'm not very practiced with this one. I can't even put it in right now. There we go. Got it. But I had this new hobby that I was hooked on. I loved it. I would every day, there was new soaps, creams, aftershaves I could try and experiment with and all that fun stuff. And it became like a little bit of an obsession. The ironic thing is I got started because the blades are cheap. They're like 50 cents or less per blade. Whereas you have to spend like $400 on a 5-blade cartridge. So I'm like, sweet. All this money I've saved, I can now spend on soap and all this other stuff that I didn't know I wanted before. And I have this new skill set that I can hone that I never knew existed. This is terrific. And for a year, it was awesome. It was great. I loved it. But over time, as it happens sometimes with hobbies, your passion kind of wanes. It becomes old hat, it's routine. You sort of lose interest with some things. And I think we've all been there. I think we've all had some hobby, some relationship, some TV show or whatever that we were really, really excited about. And then as time goes on, we sort of lose interest. I want you guys to turn to the people around you again. Take a minute. What's a hobby that you had this last year that you just got totally wrapped up in that you couldn't stop talking about? Go ahead. Talk to the people. If your answer was Pokemon Go, there's the door. I'm just kidding. There's actually a Pokestop like right here, And I think it refreshes every 5 minutes or so for the kiddos out there. We all have had passions that have sort of come and gone as time goes. And we've all been there. We've been wrapped up in something and sort of lose focus on it. But the passion can sometimes last for a period of time. Months, weeks, a year, or something like that. It can last for much longer, or sometimes it just is a task. You wake up, you get so wrapped up in something that you spend your entire morning doing it, and you had no intention or any knowledge about it before you woke up. That happens to me a lot. It kind of comes with ADHD, that you can hyper-focus on something, and it doesn't matter, the kids are fighting, okay, the house is on fire, is everyone okay? All right, I'm going to keep doing this thing. And it doesn't matter what I'm supposed to be doing, it doesn't matter what I should be doing, or if this is even beneficial or important, whatever it is, I can hyper-focus. It's like a superpower. Thursday, I hyper-focused all of my attention into my TV, because we got it for free. The only problem was that it was the HDMI port on the back was a little wiggly, and it didn't really connect very well. And I originally fixed it with some electrical tape, kind of got things going, and it was pretty good. It was chugging along really nicely. And then over time, sort of that Band-Aid fix didn't really stick, and so it got worse, and you had to jiggle the cord a little bit, and then things were back to normal. And Thursday, I decided this is it. Today is the day I'm going to fix my TV for good. And so I busted out the soldering iron, I pulled out the circuit board, I had my little connector, and I had my soldering paste. It was just terrific. And then, Friday, I had to get a new TV. It's funny how that works, right? The darndest thing. Who saw that coming? And my wife, I love her so much, she graciously and lovingly encouraged me, said, "Are you sure we really need to do this? I mean, it's mostly working." And she is right. It was technically broken, but the fix was pretty solid. I mean, I didn't have to tear apart my TV, but I had to hyper-focus. I had to do it. And then, after I broke my TV, broke my broken TV, that's the important correction, I decided I better get an early start on my taxes, because, tax season is coming up, I guess. And so I went downstairs to the basement on my computer till 4 in the morning. I was doing taxes. Wow, that sounds so boring as I say it, coming out of my mouth. It's just awful. Sometimes we get wrapped up in these tasks that we had no intention of doing, no knowledge that we wanted to do them. But over time, those can fade. And I think Jesus' followers were really wrapped up in following him. And he knew at the end of those 3 years that he was going to be gone. They were going to be left on their own. And the risk is that when that happens, the passion for following him might fade. And so he started teaching them how things are going to play out, how they're supposed to act afterwards. And so we're going to start today in Matthew chapter 14. If you've got your Bibles, pull them on out. If you don't, there's a Bible in the chair thing underneath, in front of you, whatever. Matthew 14, and we're actually going to speed read through a couple of chapters here. So all of the students that are back in town, harken back to your days of cramming. Hopefully that wasn't too long ago. So Matthew 14 is where we're going to start. It starts, John the Baptist, Jesus' brother, is killed. Kind of sucks. Then Jesus feeds 5,000 people. That's a lot of people. You've probably heard the story before. He takes 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish that was basically some kid's Lunchable, splits it over 5,000 men, along with their women, wives, and children, and there's leftovers. It's a pretty sweet deal. Never go hungry again. So he does that. He tells his disciples, "Hey, go across the sea. I'll meet you on the other side. I'm going to send everybody home." They do that. He does that. Then in the middle of the night, they're stuck in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and there's a storm. Things are getting rough, and Jesus comes walking out to them on the water. This is the classic scene where Peter steps out of the boat, says, "Hey, Jesus, I'm walking on the water towards you," sees the waves and the winds, and gets panicked, and he loses focus on Jesus. He gets too distracted by what's going on at the moment, and he loses focus on Jesus, and he starts sinking, and Jesus pulls him up. Pretty cool. Feeds 5,000. He walks on water. And then he teaches them a lesson about inner purity. These Pharisees, we're starting in chapter 15 now. I told you we were going fast. These Pharisees, these religious leaders, tried to trap him. And they asked, "Hey, why don't your disciples wash their hands the right way before they eat?" Sounds like a father talking to their children. Why don't you wash your hands? And Jesus says, he gives them this revolutionary teaching. It's not about what goes into your body that makes it impure. It's about what comes out. It doesn't matter if you eat pork, or if you're vegan, or if you're paleo, or whatever the new diet is in 2017. It doesn't matter what you eat. That doesn't make you impure. It's what comes out of your heart. The anger, the greed, the lust, the things that come out of you. That is what shows you whether you're impure or not. The things that come out, not the stuff that goes in. Revolutionary for Jesus to say that. Then he goes on, he heals this Canaanite woman, who's a really unexpected person that he would heal. The Canaanites were like the bad guys, as far as the Jewish people were concerned back then, and he goes and he heals her daughter. Then he goes on, he heals some more people, and things are starting to speed up. Then he feeds 4,000 more men along with their wives and children. You see a pattern here. He's healing, he's feeding, he's performing all these miracles. But the Pharisees don't like it. They come back to him, they demand a sign. They said, hey, we want to know what gives you the right to be teaching and healing. Who are you to be doing this? And then he says, you guys, I've got this pattern going, healing, miracles. These are signs. Do those work? No. He even says this sort of weird saying. You guys may have heard it. Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky at morning, anybody know it? Sailors take warning. Very good. That was way back then. They knew how to predict the weather. They didn't even have their smartphone or their AccuWeather forecast, no matter how accurate or not it was. They knew that if there was a red sky at night, that means that good weather is going to follow. There's a red sky in the morning, that means that it's likely that a poor weather is going to follow. Now, I could get into the scientific reasons of why the light scatters in different ways through different parts of the atmosphere and why the sky is blue in the middle of the day or red or purple or orange or gold or whatever at the beginning or at the end. I won't do that because they didn't need to do that. They recognized this pattern. Red sky at night, sailors take flight. Red sky at morning, sailors delight. That's my bad. Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. They recognize this pattern, cause and effect. And he says to them, you know how to interpret the weather signs, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. Only an evil, adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign, but the only sign I will give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah. Then Jesus left them and went away. He's alluding to the fact that he's going to die, be buried for 3 days, and come back. He's not being overt about it just yet, but he's alluding to it. He's saying, you've recognized this weather pattern that happens over and over and over again. I've done all these miracles. I've done these healings. I've demonstrated a pattern of my authority, of my ability. But you can't see that? He says, the only sign I'm going to give you is when I come back. You'll know then. And then, on their way away from this encounter, Jesus and his disciples realize, oh no, we forgot bread. Bread was important back then. And he says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Yeah, I didn't get it either at first. Neither did his disciples. They're like, what? Why does he talk about yeast? I guess we need to go get bread. But he says, that's not what I'm talking about. It goes back to that inner purity thing. The Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, were teaching this rule-keeping kind of faith. Where if you do this, if you check this box, if you follow all these rules, that is how you get close to God. That's how you have a relationship with him. That's how you attain righteousness, by following the rules. And that kind of thinking, guys, is toxic. That kind of thinking is dangerous. And Jesus says to watch out for it. Because that's how you end up thinking that you have to keep things out of your body. You have to keep things out of your body. You have to do things by the rules, and that's how God sees you as acceptable. But that's not the case. He's about to change things all around. Beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And then he asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they give some answers, and then he says, who do you say that I am. And Peter pipes up and proudly proclaims, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for. You're the Son of God. He says, way to go, man. Thumbs up for you. And then he says, don't tell anybody. Seems kind of weird, right? Just a little bit. They know he's the Messiah. They know he's this rescuer, this promised one, this special, if you like the Lego movie like me. They know he's the one that's been promised. But they don't have all the facts in order. They don't know what this Messiah is actually going to do. They don't know what this Messiah is supposed to do. They have all these preconceived ideas, but they're focused on the wrong things. They're focused on the wrong stuff. And in Matthew 16, verse 21, we finally, you guys made it, way to go, we finally get into the meat of what we're looking at today. Matthew 16, verse 21, from then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. Now this is totally new to the disciples. They had all these prophecies of the Messiah coming and rescuing them in the Old Testament, but they thought that this meant a very real, earthly, physical sort of rescuing. See, the Jewish people were under Roman rule back in the day. The Romans came in, they were very mean, let's just be honest, the Romans were kind of mean, and they were occupying this territory. The Jewish people didn't like it, and they were waiting for this Messiah to come and raise up an army, an earthly army, to kick Rome out. And now that they know that Jesus is this Messiah, he says, don't tell anyone because you're going to tell them the wrong thing. You're going to tell them all this stuff, and you're going to start getting together a little bitty army, and it's going to end badly. Trust me. Militias usually just cause trouble. And he starts teaching them. He says, this is how things are going to go. He starts teaching them plainly. Remember, he eluded the sign of Jonah that he's going to be killed, buried, and raised again on the third day. Now he's starting to be very open and upfront about it, that I'm going to die. But don't worry, I'm going to come back. It's going to be okay. But the disciples were just focused on the wrong thing. And sometimes we get that way too. We get wrapped up in the wrong thing. Sometimes it's destroying our TV late at night. Sometimes it's something that has been forced upon us by no choice of our own. We're just handed something to deal with at work or at home. Sometimes we have to get wrapped up in the wrong things. And deep down we know that we should be doing something else. Deep down we know that what we're doing might not be beneficial or fruitful. But sometimes we just get wrapped up in the wrong things. The disciples had all these preconceived ideas about what Jesus was supposed to do, how things were supposed to proceed from here. But they were wrapped up in the wrong thing. And we are too. A lot of the time. Wrapped up in what's not important. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we wrapped up in now? What have we been wrapped up in this past year? Was it the right things? Was it the wrong things? How do we need to tweak that in the coming year? They were wrapped up in the wrong thing. And then Peter speaks up. And he says, this isn't how things are going to go, Jesus. I will tell you how I'm going to make all this better. I don't want you to die. I don't want this to happen. I'll fix things. But he's sort of limited by his own perspective. Sometimes I think about what other people think about me. Anybody else do that? I think it's a pretty universal thing, a pretty universal emotion to go through. I wonder what they're thinking about me. The truth is, guys, everybody else is thinking about what other people are thinking about them. It's sort of this weird thing. Like, we are the center of our universe, so to speak. That everything that we know, everything that happens to us, happens at our work, at our home, in the car on the way to one of those places, or with our family, or wherever we are. It's sort of like just natural to fall into the mindset that everything kind of happens around us. And so we imagine that other people are in that universe with us, and that They're just, sort of around when we're around them, and then they just sort of go into some suspended animation when we leave them, right? Isn't that how life works? And it's sometimes when I get really, really into this, I think about what other people are thinking about me, thinking about them inside their head. And that, my friends, is called thinkception. But we sort of get wrapped up in our own perspective, right? We get wrapped up from our own point of view, and it's really hard to see things from the other side. It's really hard to see how somebody came to this decision that has affected you. It's really hard to see how they came to this point in their life and how they don't see the changes that they need to make. Because we're stuck in our own perspective. So Peter speaks up. In verse 22, but Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him. I don't know who gets to reprimand Jesus for saying such things. Heaven forbid, Lord, he said, this will never happen to you. Jesus turned to Peter and said, get away from me, Satan. Seems harsh. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. There's a couple things I want to bring out here. First of all, God bless Peter's soul. You ever had someone that just constantly puts their foot in their mouth and just constantly fumbling over themselves? That's sort of how Peter is. And you got to love, he's coming from a place of love for Jesus. He's not like, no, Jesus, you're wrong. This isn't the way things are going to be. I'll take over from here. He's trying to protect Jesus. He's got an honorable, admirable spirit about this whole thing, but he's still wrong. He's still looking at things from his perspective. He wants to see Rome fall. He wants to see the Jewish nation liberated, and he wants to see this rescuer come about. And so now he's starting to doubt whether or not that's actually going to take place, now that Jesus is talking about being killed. And you notice, Jesus says he'll be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. But I think Peter might have missed that part, the raised from the dead part. It's sort of like, let's pretend you're a dad. For some of you, that's really easy. And your daughter comes to you and says, hi, Dad, I'm pregnant and I'm going to the movies with Jessica, and later we're going to go hang out at Lisa's house. What are you stuck on? Right? You didn't even hear the second half of that sentence. You are locked in on your what now? I don't like Jessica. I'm just kidding. That's sort of how Peter, I think, took this. That you're dying? What? Everything else just becomes static in the background as he's focused on this only. And so Jesus takes him aside. And this account is actually this story of Jesus teaching and Peter saying, no, this won't happen, and all that stuff happens, and it's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the way that one of the others sort of explains it, he takes Peter aside, looks at his other disciples, sort of like, hey, you guys watching this? And then reprimands him. So Peter has just done this amazing, you are the Christ, you are the Son of God, and Jesus gives him props, mad props. This wasn't revealed to you by humans, he said. This was revealed directly from God. And he does that publicly. But when you get public recognition and public praise, sometimes that has to come with some public discipline. And so Jesus says, get away from me, Satan. I don't think that Jesus is actually saying hey man, you're the Prince of Darkness. Way to go. Kind of a fall from grace there. Satan means accuser or adversary. So he's saying, hey, you are butting heads with me here. That's not the way things are supposed to be. And I find it so interesting. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he's sent out into the desert where Satan says, if you bow at my feet, I'll give you all the kingdoms of this world. You don't have to go through that crucifixion thing. You don't have to go through that death, burial, resurrection thing. I'll give you the easy way out. And now Peter, this new adversary, who's got the best of intentions, is offering him the same easy way out. We'll raise up an army, Jesus. We'll make everything better. We will keep this from happening. And Jesus is saying, that's not the Messiah that I'm supposed to be. You think you know what kind of Messiah you want, but this is the kind of Messiah you need. Get behind me, adversary. Get behind me, Satan. Peter was limited by his own perspective. And sometimes, guys, we get wrapped up in our own perspective too. Whether it's something happening in our life or in our relationships with other people, or if it's something happening between us and God. Sometimes we feel like we know best, we know how our lives should be, we know what God should be doing. And it's really easy to get wrapped up in that perspective and completely miss everything else. Remember when Peter stepped out onto the water and begins walking on water? Anybody else done that? I don't think so. But he gets so wrapped up in the here and now, in the waves that are coming at him, in the wind that's howling. He gets wrapped up in his own perspective, in his own little universe, in his own little bubble. And we do the exact same thing. We get wrapped up in our own perspective, in our own universe, where everyone is constantly thinking about us. We get wrapped up in our perspective. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is what perspective are we looking at our life from? Are we looking at our life like we want everything to center around us? Or are we looking at our life like we want our life to center around God and service and being helpful for other people? What's our perspective? Does it need to change in 2017? How does it need to be different? When my wife and I were about to get married, it was a wonderful time. We started dating, and then I had to leave for the summer. It was dumb. The timing of it was dumb. You guys remember that movie Fireproof? Kirk Cameron was a firefighter or something like that. I never saw it, but she did. And so she's like, I'm taking this dating fast. Whatever. Like right before we met, it was just the worst. So the dating fast ends. It was more just like this deal she had with her friend who was in a terrible relationship. And she's like, hey, I'll do it if you do it. Sweet. Awesome. So we start dating, and like a week later, I have to move away for the summer for this internship to Brazil, Indiana. Sounds really exciting for like a second. And then, oh, Indiana. Okay, maybe not. Not too bad. I love that. I love that place. But I came back. That summer of being apart, I think, was really critical for our relationship. Because we had to decide really, really fast whether or not we were going to take this thing seriously. Because you don't like half make it through a long distance relationship, you know what I mean? You have to try. And I remember, this is like how terrible I am. There was a honest to goodness point, I hate talking on the phone. Did I mention that? No. I hate it. Just the worst thing ever invented. I hate talking on it. And so there was a moment like the first day where I was texting Brandy and we were just, doing our puppy love thing, like whatever sound the phones made back then. And there was an honest to goodness moment where I was like, I could make it this whole summer without talking to her. We could just text all the time. This will be great. This is terrific. I was very wrong. Fellas, women like to talk on the phone. If you're single, just get that in your head now. It'll save you trouble down the road. I don't know where I was going with that. Told you I didn't take my medicine. So, I get back from the summer. And I proposed like a week later for two reasons. Number one, I wanted it to be a surprise. Like, she's never going to expect this. This is going to be great. And it was pretty good. And number two, I wanted to get married fast. This is the love of my life. This is just great. And we're mostly grown-ups here. Marriage is great. I'll leave it at that. We wanted to get married quickly. I wanted to get married quickly. Brandy kind of, yeah, okay, whatever. So we got engaged in August, and I was pushing for like a New Year's Eve wedding. I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome. We'll all celebrate together. Happy New Year. This is going to be terrific. I don't know whether we can claim it on our taxes this year or last year, whatever, but so that's like a 4-month engagement or something like that, which if you've ever been in the wedding planning world, that's kind of short, I'm told. Not to mention, her two sisters had gotten married within like a year prior to that. So her parents were like, I can't do this. We just did 2 weddings. We're not doing another one this soon. And so we tried to talk them into it. And then we had to, realize that everything in the world is not a fairy tale. And I know I'm spoiling some of your guys' realities here. But we had to face reality and realize Realistically, January wedding, New Year's wedding, not happening. And that's okay. We had a wedding in October, which was my wife's real when she wanted to get married, and it was just way better because we planned things, we did things right, and we gave up a little bit of our own selfishness for the cause of the bigger picture. And sometimes we have to do that in our walk with God. And Jesus talks about that to his disciples next. Remember, he's just told Peter, you're not seeing things from my perspective. You're only looking at things from your perspective. In verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Now, if you've heard this before, if you've heard this before, you may have heard, if anyone wants to be my follower, let him take up his cross and follow me. That's not quite as forceful as the original Greek is. My translation says, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. That's pretty imperative, must. It's an important step in the equation of being a follower of Jesus. You must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And it's the same in all three of the Gospels that record this conversation. You must take up your cross and follow me. And it's an individualized cross. Take up your cross. Everybody, it's like an old cliche now. It's just my cross to bear. ADHD is just my cross to bear. My wife would tell you, no, it's your laziness. Every follower of Jesus has an interesting set of circumstances, a unique set of circumstances. And whatever circumstances you have that are your cross, they're your cross to bear. And I mean that in the most serious, personal way, that your cross is nobody else's. Your struggle to follow Jesus is nobody else's. It's only yours. And we can work together. We can strengthen each other. But at the end of the day, it's you who is following Jesus. Not your parents, not your kids, not your wife, not your husband. It's you who's a follower of Jesus. And it's you who has a cross to take up. Nobody else can take that up for you. And when he says take up your cross, nowadays the cross is like this emblem that we use all over the place. And we have it on necklaces, we have it right here, we have it all over the place, in America, in the church, wherever. Back then, it's like if we had a mini mock electric chair just sitting right here. I don't know why we would. That would be kind of twisted and sick. But that's what they would have thought of when Jesus is talking about take up your cross. It's an offensive image to them. It represents Roman rule. It represents capital punishment that they thought was unjust. The Jewish way to execute somebody was to stone them to death, throw rocks at them until they die. Seems just pleasant as punch. But the Roman way to do it was a cross. And so he's bringing all of these flavors into the conversation that they would have been like, wait, what are you talking about? Why would you want to do this? Why would we want to do this? And they all know that a cross is a one-way street. Anybody who's picking up a cross, it's ending soon. You're not coming back from that. There's not a detour. You know where that leads. And he's saying that to follow him, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Because he's the one that offers this life to the full that he talks about. In fact, this reminds me of a conversation that he had in Matthew chapter 10, where he gets a little bit more intense. And he says, if you love your father or mother more than you love me, you are not worthy of being mine. Or if you love your son or daughter more than me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. Jesus doesn't mince words. He's a very straightforward kind of guy. And he's not saying that you should abandon your responsibilities as a son or a daughter or a mother or a father. He's not saying that those aren't important things. But he's saying that if there's anything that stands in your way of being a follower of Jesus, that's a problem. He's the only one worth following. The disciples thought that they were following this Messiah that was going to bring revolution and liberation. But that's not the Messiah they needed. They were looking for a Messiah that was going to be raising up an earthly kingdom and army to defeat these Romans and bring this earthly physical salvation and rescue. That's not what they needed. They needed someone to save them from the spiritual trouble that they had found themselves in, this spiritual oppression that they were under. And that's the kind of Messiah that Jesus was. And he says, if you're not ready to get on board with that, that's a problem. And sometimes we have to fight the temptation to follow our own perspective or follow the wrong thing or get wrapped up in any of that stuff. Because as true as it was for them, it's true for us too. That Jesus is the only one worth being wrapped up in. And he says, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. There's more to this world than just fulfilling every need and want and desire that you have. And if you're living that kind of life that's all about you, all about me, and all about the stuff I can accumulate and the wealth I can build, you're going to get bored. Life's going to start to taste pretty bland. And you'll find yourself with a lack of purpose. That the real, true life only comes from Jesus. And if you're in this whole Jesus thing just to save your life, just to get your bus pass to heaven, you're entirely missing the point of the gospel. Jesus isn't just a ticket into heaven. He is a leader and a Messiah for all of us here and now on this earth. The kingdom of heaven is here among us on this earth. He even says, I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And the very next thing that happens to his disciples is the transfiguration, where Jesus goes up on a mountain and Moses and Elijah come down and he sort of becomes this glowing kind of guy. Mind-blowing thing if you read it. But it's sort of like a confirmation. Hey guys, I just laid out some pretty heavy stuff. I'm going to die. I'm going to be resurrected. It's going to be pretty crazy. But here is your assurance. I'm standing here with heavenly fathers of the faith. This is your assurance. This is your confirmation that everything's still going according to plan. All the stuff I've laid out, that's the way things need to go. If we go back to verse 21, it says, from then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, and so on and so on. From then on is a really interesting part in Matthew. It's used at the beginning of his ministry. It's used here at what I would call the climax of his ministry. And it's used after Judas agrees to betray him, at the closing of his ministry, his earthly ministry. It sort of acts as the markers of Matthew as he's walking you through the acts in this life. And this is a pivotal moment for the disciples. They have to get this. This is a turning point for them. They have to understand that this is the Messiah that Jesus is, that this is the Messiah that they need. And New Year's sort of acts like that for us. It's a turning point. One chapter is closing in our life, and another one is opening. Maybe you've had an addition to your family, or maybe your family has lost someone very dear. Maybe you've had a job change, or any number of different things have happened in your life that mark this year as a unique turning point. And the way you move forward from here is up to you. The good news is sometimes we get wrapped up in things on accident, but sometimes we can choose what we want to get wrapped up in. And guys, what I want to encourage you guys to do is this year get wrapped up in Jesus. This year make him your number one priority. Make him the first thing that you think about when you wake up and the last thing you think about before you go to sleep. This marks a good time for us to look back over the past year. What have we been wrapped up in? And look forward to the coming year. What can we be wrapped up in? Or what do we need to change about what we've been wrapped up in? And those are the questions I want to leave you guys with. As we move into this time of communion, Jesus died a year later, give or take, so that we could have a relationship with God, so that we could get to God without having to go through these steps and rules that the religious leaders of the day were trying to lay out. Jesus came so that he could change everything about how we relate to God. And this is the time of year where we can take stock of how we've been doing and look at how we can adjust and look at what we can change and how we can be a better follower of Jesus. We're not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. But what I'm striving for is tomorrow to be 1% better than today. And the next day, 1% better than that. See, taking up your cross doesn't happen on accident. We have to make a choice. We have to choose to follow Jesus, to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for this time that we get to spend in your word. I pray that you would just be in our hearts as we partake of your body and your blood. I pray that you would just be in our minds all year and help us to set you as our priority in the coming months and weeks and days. We love you so much, and it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.